How many HR professionals do we have here right now, today? Let me see your hands. Dang, I'd love to be sitting there at the table with you all because HR people have the best stories. I've learned that over the years. You ever want to have a great lunchtime conversation, sit with the HR people and see if you can get them going into a can you top this kind of thing, right? In terms of the stories that they've got floating around out there. I want to thank Bill and Pat Taphorn and the folks at Unland for the invitation. It's great to be with you and to be over here and share some thoughts and ideas with you. Also want to thank the folks at Hometown Community Banks, Morton Community Bank, who have been very generous over the years in supporting me and my efforts and supporting our communities, and obviously that deserves our respect and our appreciation. So I want to acknowledge them at the start. And thank you for having me talk about this. So how's everything in your workplace today? Interesting times, aren't they? Let's talk about some of this and what's going on. I call this working across generations, and before I get started, I always like to say a couple of little caveats. We're going to talk about different generations. They're not good and they're not bad. They're just different, all right? Every generation thinks ours was the best, right? I mean, I have a sign that somebody finally found for me, one of my former students, because I've been talking about this, and actually got the bumper sticker. I started out in the 1970s, I'm not going to tell you when in the 1970s, in the record industry. I sold records and tapes. We were just making the conversion from 8 tracks to cassettes. We thought that was really cool, boy. That was really high tech. But they found me a bumper sticker, and I still haven't put it on my car yet, but I love it. It says, I may be old, but at least I got to see all the really good bands. And there's some truth to that. And every generation, right, we think that our music was the best. The athletes we grew up with, they were the best. You know, Jack Nicklaus to me is still the ultimate golfer. I know Tiger's won a few, but Jack still got more, you know, that type of thing. So we've got to be a little careful as we talk about this, because there's a tendency to say, okay, this is good, this is bad. They're not good or bad. They're just different. So let's start out by accepting that as we start as a premise. Number 2, as we talk about generations, you're all going to think of an exception. Oh, we got somebody in our office, we got somebody there, they're not like that. Or you're going to be the exception. You're going to say, I'm not like that. Okay, that's fine, right? I mean, we know that in any normal pool of human beings, right, bell-shaped curve distribution, some are going to be this way, some are going to be that way. We understand that, but the exception doesn't disprove the rule. So when I talk about some of the generations here, in general, the rule holds, right? So yes, you will think of exceptions, but doesn't necessarily disprove what we're talking about here when we talk about working across generations. Number 3, I like to fish, and when I go out here to some of the lakes, like for instance, one of the private lakes I'm able to get on, courtesy of a friend of mine, he tells you right up front that, you know, this thing's stocked with bass. It's like 90% bass. So when you're out fishing, you're expecting to get a bass. And every once in a while you're going to get a crappie, or you're going to get a bluegill. But if the lake's 90% bass, if you're fishing in the lake, odds are pretty good you're going to pull out a bass. So when I talk about some of these generations to you, and you sit there and you think, ooh, you know, that's not been our experience. Okay, but when you're out hiring in that pond, odds are real good you're going to get a bass. All right? Now, you may have a selection technique that's going to allow you to get the odd crappie or the odd bluegill here and there, but the odds are pretty good you're going to get a bass. So just keep that in mind as we kind of go through and sort of talk about some of this stuff, okay? Sorry because it's such a wide angle here, so those of you that are sitting over there trying to, what's he got up there on the PowerPoints, but you know, I'll try to fill you in on some of them so you can kind of work with me on some of this stuff. Start out by asking you to take a trip down memory lane. What do you recall? And you got some, I see you got paper and pens there, so you might just want to jot some of these down, because I'm going to ask you to throw them out here in just a second, right? Say them out loud. Question number 1, what's the first TV show you really remember watching? What was the first TV show you really remember watching? Write it down. Right? When you were a kid, right? The first TV show I remember was, I watched, you know, you used to watch it religiously. Man, you had to get there in front of the TV set and watch it. I'm getting to be an old guy, right, as a boomer, so, you know, my TV only had 3 channels and it had a knob where you had to actually, you know, get up and change them. You couldn't sit there with the remote. But what was the first TV show you remember really watching? Question number 2. What was the first music album or CD you bought for yourself? What was the first music album or CD you bought for yourself? Right? Think back. Mine was James Taylor's Sweet Baby Jane. Still remember that. First movie you remember going to see as a child? What's the first movie you remember going to see as a child? Mom and Dad took you. This was the movie. That's the first one I really remember. Now, they might have taken you to something else, but that's the one you really remember. Name a song you danced to in high school. Prom or homecoming or, you know. What did you get down to when you were in your get down days, you know? My problem today is if I try to get down, I can't always get back up. So, you know, you gotta watch out for that. Who's the first president of the United States you remember being talked about in your home or school? Who's the first president of the United States you remember? And we talked about him in our home, talked about him in our school, you know, yeah, that was kind of the first one for me. And finally, what one historical event do you most remember when you were a child? In other words, well, I can tell you where I was when I heard that historical news or that historical event. What's sort of the first one that you remember? The earliest sort of, yeah, I remember that. And it's a big deal. Now let's take just a couple of seconds and kind of go through them. First TV show you remember watching?
Cheers.
Okay?
Dukes of Hazzard.
Dukes of Hazzard.
Andy Rogers.
Andy Griffith. Hey, hey, hey. Right with me.
Little Rascals.
Little Rascals. Okay? Family Matters. Bonanza, yes, absolutely, and Wagon Train, and Maverick, and that was, yeah, I was a huge fan of the westerns. Gunsmoke. I mean, you know, nothing like seeing somebody get shot, you know, multiple times. I don't think I turned out bad, so it evidently didn't affect me. First music album or CD that you bought? Yell them out. Come on, this is like the interactive part of the presentation, folks. So work with me here. First music album or CD? What was it?
TLC.
TLC. Okay. Beach Boys. Do you remember which album, by the way?
Pet Sounds.
Okay, all right. I thought it might be Endless Summer, but okay.
Vanilla Ice.
Ice Ice Baby, right? Okay, good. Right? What else? Come on.
Sticks.
What? Which Paul Simon? Okay, right.
Sticks.
What?
Sticks.
Sticks. Grand Illusion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Very good. I sold that stuff, so I actually went to that concert. I remember that. All right, good. First movie you remember going to see?
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future.
E.T.
What? Goonies?
E.T.
E.T. Phone home. Okay.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Really? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Okay, all right. Very good. What else?
The Lion King.
Lion King. Okay. Yeah.
How about Mary Poppins?
Mary Poppins. That's, yeah. See, if you ever watched the Saving Mr. Banks on how that film was made, great movie there with Tom Hanks. What else? Movies.
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Okay. How many times? Because most people saw it multiple times. Once you saw it, name a song you danced to in high school.
Hey Jude.
Hey Jude. Yeah, the DJs liked that one because it had the the DJs used to put that one on in Stairway to Heaven when they needed to take a bathroom break, because they were good for they're good for, you know, 12, 13 minutes, man. Just that endless, yeah, just keep it going. What else? Come on, songs you dance to.
Firehouse.
Okay, right?
Can't touch this.
Can't touch this. All right, very good. Okay. All right.
I would like to see that dance.
First president of the United States you remember? Nixon. Reagan. Kennedy. Carter. I'll come back to this. Hang on. There's a method to my madness here. Significant historical event. First real significant historical event you remember.
Reagan shot.
What's that?
Reagan getting shot.
Reagan getting shot. What did I hear? Kennedy? What Kennedy? Kennedy getting shot? Okay. Yeah, mine too. Came home from school. Mom and Grandma were crying in front of the TV set. Challenger blowing up.
9/11.
9/11. Okay.
2000 election.
2000 election. Okay. Princess Diana died. Okay. is it about this that's significant, right? What is it about this that's important? By the way, some of this stuff, based on your answers, I could tell you which generational cohort you're in. Okay? And that's why this is important. Let's talk about these cohorts. The French sociologist Auguste Comte, philosopher, said demography is destiny. Was his line. There's some truth to that. Did you know that we crossed the threshold in 2015? In 2015, millennials became the single largest cohort in the U.S. workforce. There are 53.5 million millennials, 52.7 million Gen Xers, 44.6 million baby boomers. And if you look at the chart, millennials are on the up, Gen Xers have plateaued, and baby boomers were on the way up. So you can kind of figure out what the future of the workforce is going to look like. That's the nice thing about demography. It's pretty forecastable. I think I'm going to forecast right now that all of us are going to be 1 year older 365 days from now. You know, and unless something tragic happens, I'm pretty good with that forecast, right? Type of thing. When we talk about demography, look at the U.S. workforce, right? Look at the U.S. population here for just a second. The bulge up here that you see, that's the baby boomers. Post-World War II. This is kind of ranking them by age. Then you've got males on this side and females on that side. So boomers, you got that bulge here. Gen Xers, that's what we call the baby bust. There were fewer of those. And we had a decline in the population at that point in time, given that cohort. But look at the millennials down here. Not only are they back up, they're back up in numbers that exceed the baby boomers. So millennials are going to be a significant part of our workforce going forward. And by the way, behind them, just so you know, these folks down here, we refer to those as Generation Z, or as they're now called today, iGen. And if you want to know something, and by the way, the first of the iGens will be freshmen this fall at Bradley University. iGen was born 2000 or later. So the first iGens will be the freshman class at Bradley University this year. A couple things you might want to note about them. Their phones have always been smart. They don't remember those big cell phones that we strapped on our hips kind of thing. Their phones have always been smart. As far as they know, Bill Clinton is Hillary's elder husband. And in response to what someone here said, they can't tell you where they were on 9/11. They either weren't born or they were 1 year old at the time. So think about that, right? In terms of their life experience and the kinds of things they've gone through. But we're going to focus on these folks because they're kind of the key. Now, one of the things you need to know about human beings is that our basic values that we're going to hold, that we're going to adhere to in our life, we acquire them fairly young. My wife is a counseling psychologist when we were at Michigan State. She was working on her Ph.D. as I was. I got to know one of her guys there, a guy named Phil Davidson, and I asked him about, to verify this, because Phil was very highly regarded in early childhood development. I said, Phil, is that true? I heard once that, most of the values we're going to hold, we pretty much have acquired those by age 5. And he said, no, we don't think that's true anymore. And I thought, oh, that's good. I didn't think that made sense. He said, today we think it's age 3. And the scary thing is you can't remember that. But the basic values that we got, and I still like that age 5 thing, was what was going on when we were younger. And a guy by the name of Ray Massey, a social psychologist out of the University of Colorado, years ago made this observation that he said, you know what you are is what you were when. What he meant by that was the basic values that you're going to hold, that are going to guide your behavior, you pretty much acquired those when you were 5 years old. Now, those of you who've got teenagers right now, when you go through your teenage years, you have to test the values. What you're doing during your teenage years is you're internalizing what mom and dad gave you, and you're making them your own, usually through your own experience. So mom and or dad said, don't cheat. And you said, yeah, okay, I got that. And then in high school, when the peer group became powerful, they said, oh, come on, give me the answers to the test. And then you got caught, and now you go around and you tell your kids, hey, don't cheat. It's based on your experience. So you take the values that you were given, and you go through a process of internalizing those, questioning those. You might even semi-rebel against those. So those of you that are going through that with your teenagers right now, do not despair, because you know what else the research shows? Guess what happens when they get to be about 23, 24, 25? They go right back to the values that they acquired at age 5. They will come back. And mom and dad get really smart once they turn to be about 23, 24, 25, and they're trying to figure out mortgages and car payments and all that other stuff. All of a sudden, mom and dad are pretty smart people. Right? So that was sort of his thesis, that that's how we acquire those basic values. So when we look at these generations, we have to ask ourselves, what were their experiences? What were they going through? Now, you're not going to be able to read this, but I love the chart. These are the boomers down here in the blue, the Xers are here in the yellow, and the millennials are here kind of in the orange or kind of pink, if you will. Think about for just a moment, though, some of the things that these generations were experiencing. So, whoever said they remember Kennedy's assassination, I do too. Again, my first big one, we're boomers. I could have predicted right from the beginning, okay, we're boomers. Okay. Certainly that was an issue for us. The microwave oven came out in 1952. For those of you that are early boomers, the McCarthy hearings were 54. McDonald's was founded in 55. That was the same year Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus. You're thinking about that. The interstate highway system was started in 56. NASA was formed in 58. Barbie came out in the same year. In that, those of you that are late boomers, 1960s, kind of in that overlap. Civil rights movement began in that time period. The Bay of Pigs, of course, the Cuban Missile Crisis. John Glenn orbited the Earth. Walmart was actually founded in 62. Kennedy assassinated in 63. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech was the same year. The Beatles toured the U.S. in 1964. That's what was going on during the boomer years. Those were our life experiences. That's what was happening around us. Right? And remember, you all see some overlap here, right? Blue and yellow is green, and yellow and red is kind of orange. So again, when people talk about generations, they like to sort of put years on them, but there's always some slop, there's always some overlap. Okay? Those of you who are in that Gen X period, so the early Gen Xers, I was just talking about you folks, those of you who were born in the late 60s, but now let's talk about the 70s for a moment. 1970, we had the Kent State shootings. Visa cards came out in 1970. Prior to that, they were store credit cards. MasterCard and Visa are a fairly recent phenomenon. OPEC was 1973. The Watergate burglary was 72. Okay. Roe versus Wade, 1973. Nixon resigned in 74. Microsoft was founded in 75. Star Wars came out in 77, for those of you that remember that movie. Apple Computer in 78. The Iran hostage crisis in 79. And also 3 Mile Island. Now let's move to the 80s kind of time frame. MTV started in 1981. That was pretty significant. The Grenade invasion under Reagan, 83. Mario Brothers came out also in 83. Windows was created in 85. The Challenger blew up in 86. That was the same year as Iran-Contra, and the Exxon Valdez was 1988. Those of you who are later in that period now, we're getting into the early millennials now. The Iraq War was 91. We had Amazon.com in 94. The Oklahoma City bombing was 95. Google came out in 96. The Whitewater scandal was 96 through 99. Now think about what each of those generations was going through, what they were living through, and what they were experiencing. Very different, aren't they? And as a result, they've acquired a very different set of values. And you need to know this because they're all coming into the workforce at the same time. Rarely have we had, it's not often we have 3 roughly equal generations in the workforce. By the way, given that life expectancies are increasing, the anticipation is that in the next 5 to 10 years we will have 4 generations simultaneously in the workforce. And so you really do have to start thinking about some of those iGen folks who will be coming out next. But what can we say about these generations? Based on their life experiences, on the things that they acquired. Now, I'm going to go and give you some data here, and don't worry about reading the charts. I'll tell you the highlights of it. Courtesy of the Pew Research, most of this courtesy of the Pew Research Institute. So if you don't like the data, don't blame me. I'm just telling you what the Pew Research has come up with, what they've said. And one of the things they always talk to you about is they say you should never talk about religion and politics, when you're doing a speech for a group. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about politics and religion first, so we'll do it the other way. Let's talk about politics. What can we say about these generations and their political leanings? Well, one of the things we know about them is that millennials are far less conservative than the older generations. So 41% of baby boomers self-identify as conservatives, 35% of Gen Xers, only 26% of millennials. And by the way, if you ask them how many self-identify as liberals, 31% of millennials, 24% of Gen X, and only 21% of boomers. And those differences are statistically significant. So this is not just a little artifact, right? This is a difference in the cohorts. It's a difference in the cohorts by virtue of how they grew up, what was happening to them at the time. And it's changed the way they think about things like politics, and it's changed the way they think about religion. Rise of religiously unaffiliated amongst younger generations. This is the percent unaffiliated with a religion. Okay? 25% of millennials are unaffiliated, 21% of Gen Xers, 15% of boomers. And if you get down to what we call the traditionalists or the silent generation, there's only 10%, and that's funny, right? The older you get and the closer you get to dying, the more religion becomes important to you. It's bizarre, a little phenomenon kind of thing here. Likewise, if you ask them how important religion is by generation, 67% of boomers say it's important, 60% of Gen Xers, only 52%. Backwards. 60% of boomers, 52% of millennials, only 40%. Of Xers, only 40% of millennials say religion is important to them. These are different people. These are not the same as their parents and their grandparents. Okay? Marriage. Just a grad student of mine just presented a paper up at a conference in Chicago that we had co-authored together, but I couldn't go up, and so my wife, this grad student, I did the paper, and the grad student just presented it. It's called Childless at Work, was the title of the paper. Got very, very good reviews. Because one of the things we know about millennials is they're delaying marriage and they're delaying having children. And you know some of those great benefit programs you have that get companies on the best places to work list, like on-site childcare, and parental leave. If you're a millennial and you're not having kids, that doesn't mean anything to you. As a matter of fact, if you're a millennial and you're not having kids, you feel like, man, I'm screwed here because the parents are getting the time off and the work's got to be done. So they look at me and they say, well, you don't have any kids, you can do it. How fair is this? And we're seeing that now, right? Because of this phenomenon. So if you look at the percent of each generation that was married by the time they reached age 32, only 26% of millennials were married by 32, 36% of Gen Xers, 48% of the boomers. Married by the time they were 32. That's the difference, folks. These are different people. Remember, I didn't say good or bad. I said they're different. Okay. Technology. You're not going to be surprised by this one, I don't think. This is sort of the gimme, right? If you ask people the following question, does technology make your life more complicated or easier? Right? Overall in the US, it's 64-26. 10% haven't figured out technology yet. They don't even know what technology is yet, right? But 64-24 is the overall. But look at the difference amongst the generations. Millennials, 74-18. Gen Xers, 69-21. Boomers, 60-30. Millennials love their technology. They live for their technology. Their network is on Facebook. One of my colleagues at Bradley made an interesting observation to me, and I'll bet you're seeing this in the workplace, with the letters that they write, that millennials write. Because I read their papers, right? They have to write papers for my class. And I'm sitting there going over this stuff, and I'm having to correct a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and the other, and I'm at a conference, and one of my colleagues, and we're just sitting there around talking, and one of the folks said to me, have you noticed that there's a difference in the writing today among students? I said, oh yeah, very definitely, right? If I compare 10 years ago with today, the writing is writing style is very different today. And she said, and this was sort of like the whoa, aha moment for me, she said, have you noticed that their writing tends to sound a lot like a text message? And I said, oh my gosh, you got it. That's it, right? I couldn't explain it before. I knew there was something different about it, but I couldn't figure out what was going on. And my gosh, it's like a text. Why is it like a text message? Because that's the primary way they communicate. That's their primary form of communication. They don't pick up the phone and call. Minutes are unimportant to them, but don't you dare limit my texting or my data. We all remember when those of us who were old enough, we remember when the first cell phones came out and everything was about your minutes, wasn't it? And God forbid you went out of area and you had to pay those roaming charges. Those would kill you. Now, we're giving away the minutes. Hey, talk as long as you want, right? but we're going to watch your data because technology is important to them. Information sources. I'm a baby boomer, and like most baby boomers, our primary information source is local TV. By golly, we actually watch the local television stations. Right? And behind that, you've got NBC News, Fox News, ABC, CNN, etc. Right? That's our primary source of information. The sources you can trust. You go to the Gen Xers already, Facebook, 51%. Local TV comes in second at 46%, followed by CNN and then the news networks. Millennials, 61% of millennials get their primary information from Facebook. Now, ladies and gentlemen, think for just a moment about Facebook. How do you get information on Facebook? You get it from your feeds. You get it from the people that you have friended. So what information do you get? Information that validates what you already are predisposed to believe from your values. So nobody sits there and questions whether it's fake news or not. It's on Facebook. It came over my network. It must be true. Do you begin to understand why we've got an issue in our country with information base? If all I know is what's being fed to me by the people who I like and who like me, guess what information I'm going to get? I'm not going to get the contrary views. I'm not going to get the contrary opinions. No one's going to challenge my thinking. I'm going to be reinforced in my own ideas and my own stereotypes. And this is by virtue of the way they grew up. They've always had a phone. They've always had computer technology. They started out learning on Apples and on Dells. Right? That was basic for them. Social networking then, as a result of that. Where is their network? This is social networking site usage by age group. 73% of all internet users are on some sort of social site, but 90% of the early millennials are. 78% of the later millennials. We dropped down to 65 for you Gen Xers and only 46% of me. And most of us are on Facebook either for the discounts or because we want to keep tabs on our kids. I can't tell you the last time I actually went on Facebook and posted something. I just don't use it. I didn't grow up that way. Self-image. How do they see themselves? Supporter of gay rights. 51% of millennials, 37% of Gen Xers, 33% of boomers. Patriotic person. 48%. Only 48% of millennials, 64% of you Gen Xers, 75% of me and my boomers. A religious person, only 36% of millennials, 52% of Gen Xers, 66% of boomers. An environmentalist, only 32% of millennials, 42% of both millennials and boomers. And this one usually surprises people. They say, well, wait a minute, I thought millennials were not. No, they don't think about being an environmentalist. Why not? Because they always grew up with recycling. They have never known a time when stuff wasn't recycled. So the environment has always been part of their lifestyle. Therefore, they don't think about themselves as being an environmentalist. Some of us know that Earth Day was just celebrated this past week. They don't remember Earth Day. Every day for them is Earth Day. So they don't focus on it. Trust. Now this starts to be important because now we're going to get into the organizational dimensions here. Single most, hands down, single most important quality you can have to have an effective organization is trust. Right? Here's the statement. Generally speaking, most people can be trusted. 40% of boomers agree with that, only 31% of Gen Xers, and only 19% of millennials. And you wonder why, when you come out with your latest pronouncement, in terms of our great corporate program and benefit, they're kind of looking at you, yeah, right, whatever. But think about it. Want to understand why? Think about how they grew up. Right? Boomers, we were Kennedy. Kennedy and Eisenhower was our president. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We're going to put a man on the moon by 1969 and do the other great things because we can. It was an era of optimism. Those of you who start out, when I say, who's the first president you remember? Nixon. You remember Watergate. You remember the Pentagon Papers. That's why Gen X, as a generation, one of the most skeptical generations in human history. Test everything. Because that's the way I grew up. Millennials, they've grown up with fake news. Trust no one. It's all fake. They love conspiracy theories because they're feeding on their own news feeds from their own tribe. That's going to be an issue for us in the workplace because they don't trust. And that issue of the leadership thing is going to come back in just a second when we talk about that. When I asked you that question about president, it's going to come back to impact what we think about leadership. Lifestyle. So, keep in mind, baby boomers, they were the first ones to see the family unit disintegrate. We were the first ones to kind of see divorce in any great scale and any great extent in our country. Okay? Generation X, those of you in the 65 to 80 kind of time period, you were the first latchkey kids. Because those of us who were boomers, right, for most of us, it was a single wage earner household. We could afford to be because of the economic expansion that occurred in the 1950s, early 1960s. But by the time you get to Gen X, we got to put both mom and dad to work, dual income household, so they came home from school and they were the first latchkey kids. Generation Y, merged families, blended families. You think about, boomers watching Leave It to Beaver. Dad went to work, mom stayed home and raised the kids. By the time we get to Gen X, we're talking MASH, we're talking Mary Tyler Moore, we're talking Bob Newhart, professionals, right? Think about what we're talking about today, Modern Family. And that's what that cohort, that's what they relate to because that's what they're used to. My line is always, I said, it's kind of like, I said, you want to see the difference between them? I said, watch my son's, I'm going to call her fiance because they will get engaged. It's just a matter of him getting out of school. She's a perfect prototype of that. I said at our house, here's what we do on Christmas Day. We get up, we go to church, we come home, we open presents, we hang out together, we grill, we have dinner together, we hang out some more, we go to bed. That's Christmas Day at our family. At her house, she gets up, they open presents with her sisters at the first house. Then we got to go to this grandparent's home because we've got another sister who's from another father, and those are the grandparents that are involved, so we got to go have Christmas over there. And then we leave there, and then we go over here because now we're going to go to these grandparents because those are the grandparents for 3 of the 4 sisters, so we go to their home. And then after that, we go over to this parent's home because this is the parent of the one daughter who's not the other 2, so we have Christmas there. And then she goes over and has Christmas dinner at night with her dad, and then eventually she comes over to our house. And I said, Jesse, I don't know how you do it. I'd be exhausted. Man, you got to get to like 5 places on Christmas Day. But that's a blended family. And we're going to see more and more of those today because, anybody know the number? 60% of all children in the United States spend all or part of their formative years in a single parent situation. And depending on the ethnic group, it could be higher than that. But on average, 60% of the students that we get at Bradley University are spending all or part of their formative years in a single parent situation. Do you know we have never had that statistic as a society of human beings before? We've never had that. And now we do. And what we're starting to see, and I've got articles that I can reference on this one, is we are starting to see that the parenting process in a single parent situation is different from the parenting in a 2-parent home. I didn't say better, I didn't say worse, please. I said it's different than what you get in a 2-parent home. And we're starting to see some of the data on this. So for us, boomers, education was, boy, that was the golden, man, that was the way we were going to get ahead. That was, okay, we got to get up, go to school, get an education. Gen Xers, education is instrumental. It's a way to get to where I want to go in the future. For Gen Y, for the millennials, education's an unbelievable expense. I paid my way through school. I don't think you could do that today as a millennial. They graduate with huge student debt. And so when they're talking to you, by the way, and you're telling them about your parental leave and your on-site child care, they're sitting there saying, forget that, can you give me more money? Because I got to pay off my student loan. I'd rather have the cash because that's more meaningful to me because I got this student loan debt hanging over my head. We were excited when we got touch-tone phones, those of us who were boomers. We thought that was pretty cool, all right? Gen Xers, you had cell phones, right? But you only use them, you can call me at work, but only at work. Gen Y, between the internet, picture phones, and email, they're constantly wired. They're sitting in your meetings with their phones on, and in the middle of the meeting, it buzzes, and they pick the phone up to take a look at it. Because they have to. Because that's the way they were raised. That's the communication process. Okay. We were the first to get credit cards, so we're willing to buy now and pay later. But because of what happened in the 1980s, those of you who are Gen Xers and saw the economy crater during that time period, you're a little more cautious. Right? Gen Y, make it to spend it. Millennials are make it and spend it. Right? The purpose of money is to support my lifestyle. That's it. So it's a difference in terms of how they respond to various types of incentive programs, how they respond to various types of savings packages. They're going to be different because of that. And now let's bring them into the workplace. We're the workaholic generation. We work like mad. Okay, that's our big deal, right? Gen Xers, you're the skeptics. So you want to find a better way to do it, right? Gen Y, multitask. We still think, boomers, we think of work as something to appreciate, something to enjoy. Those of you that are Gen Xers, work is a contract. It's challenging, right? I gotta keep working my way, fighting my way through it. Gen Y, I work to live. My life is outside of the workplace. Those of us who are boomers, a lot of us got in the trap, living to work, right? Not the millennials, they're not going to do that. You can still motivate us with money and titles. Generation X, those of you that are in that mid-range, you want feedback and freedom. Generation Y, I want information whenever I want it. I want to be able to walk in your office anytime and say, how am I doing? And you better be able to give me feedback. Another graduate student, my wife and I also wrote a paper on that we actually got published and won a best paper award with that thing, on giving negative feedback to millennials. How do you criticize the most praised generation? Everyone got a participation trophy. And what really lights their fire, what really turns them on, they want to feel that their work is meaningful, that it's having an impact. And millennials are going to be a very transient generation. As soon as they feel that the work's not meaningful, the work's not hitting my buttons, time for me to go find a better situation. And you'll look at them and say, yeah, and they'll say to you, yeah, how's it going? I don't know, I've only been here 9 months. I'm thinking about looking for another job. What's the matter? I just don't feel like my work's having an impact. Okay, you've only been here 9 months. You haven't even gotten through one accounting cycle, for crying out loud. I mean, what do you mean your work's not? But that's the psychology, right? Because of the way they were raised, because of the influence that was had on them, that's the psychology. And we got all these people in the workforce at the same time, so when it comes to leadership, we expect it to come sort of top-down. That's the way we were raised, in an authoritarian structure. Gen X, leadership's very informal. For you that are Gen Xers, you want coaching. We want a boss. I'm a boomer. We want a boss. Gen Xers want a coach. All right? Millennials are looking for a partner. And they get very upset when you give them criticism. We wrote the paper on that. Or when you have to tell them, well, you're not getting a raise because, what do you mean? You're my friend, you're my partner here in this work environment. If I'm not getting a raise, it must be your fault. Excuse me? Right? But that's the psychology, right? By virtue of how they were raised, that's the issue that they're dealing with. Now, I threw a thing on the table if you want to kind of mess with this and just sort of see. It's a simple little survey kind of thing. What generation am I? If you get a chance, you can take one with you. You can find that online. I'm not telling you that it's perfectly predictable, but it's not bad, interestingly enough. And it taps into some of these differences that we have as people in the workplace. The thing that you want to take from this, the thing that you want to bear in mind, is that we're going to put all these people in the same organization and confront them with the same management problem, because management has not changed over the centuries. Management is still getting things done through people. And actually, little longer than that, the best definition was from the American Management Association. Management is the art of getting things done through people. That's important. It's an art, not a science. It's the art of getting things done through people. Did you hear that definition? 2 parts to it. Number 1, getting things done. There are things the organization has to have done. Period, end of discussion. It's not up for debate. It's non-negotiable. This has to be done. That's the first part of management. And we tend to overlook that, I think, oftentimes. That there are certain organizational imperatives that have to be satisfied. But the second part of that definition is the one that causes us to tear our hair out. It's through people. First rule of management, if you're doing the work, you're not managing. It's first rule of management. If you're doing the work, you're not managing. Because managing is getting other people to do the work. And the scary thing is, the skill set that enables managers to do that is not the same one that usually gets them promoted into management. Usually you get promoted because of your technical skills and competencies. And what they don't tell you is after you get that promotion, oh, congratulations, you're now a manager, you're now a supervisor. Every other job in an organization, your function to progress is a function of how well you get other people to perform. And that's a different skill set from the technical one that gets you hired and gets you your first promotion. So if it's the art of getting things done through people, what we need to understand is the people that we're getting in the workplace now, by virtue of their upbringing, no fault of their own, no fault of their own, by virtue of their upbringing, by virtue of what was going on in the world when they were learning their values, are going to have a very different view of the workplace, of the world of work, and how they interact with people in the organization. Think about it. I always use this as the easy one, right? Think about those presidents that we talked about. My first view of leadership was Kennedy. Millennials, Nixon. Or, God forbid, Carter. So the president's either a crook or inept. Then Reagan comes along. You've got this little bubble of people for whom Reagan is sort of back, we're back to the optimist for just a moment. If you can catch somebody in that period, you get a little bit of optimism there, but already politically it's starting to disintegrate, and by the time you get to millennials, do you know who the first president is that millennials remember? Bill Clinton. So my image of leadership, my image of leaders in the organization is they're there to take us forward. Those of you that are millennials, you're skeptical of them. Because you know that leaders, I am not a crook. Yes, you are. Okay? Think about millennials. Oh, heck, President of the United States will get on television and lie to your face just to keep their position. You can't trust that. You wonder why they're not trusting? You can't trust them. They'll lie through their teeth in order to protect themselves. I wish I could conclude by sitting here saying, and here's the 5-step, 6-step, 7-step process that allows us to be able to facilitate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have one. We don't have a formula for this. And for people who say, well, we've gone through this before, yeah, we have and we haven't. We've gone through it before, and yet at the same time we haven't, because we've never had an information technology such as we have today, where we're actually in a period of information overwhelm. Once upon a time, if something happened at an organization, right? If somebody sexually harassed someone at an organization, you never heard about it. That was light years away from you. It didn't matter. It wasn't even relevant. Today, if it happens in an organization, it's #MeToo, and boom. Suddenly, it's on the nightly news. It's different today. I didn't say good. I didn't say bad. I said it's different today. And we're going to have to revise our approach to managing people to deal with the new realities, both of the workplace and of the generations now, the multiple generations that we have in the workplace. What questions do you have? Thoughts, comments, observations? I'll take anything. Because I'm trying to figure out how to do it too. So if you got a technique for doing this, let me know. Yes?
What about some tools that will be effective for our leadership teams inside of our entities? I mean, I look at this and I think if my leadership team is 20 people,
Yep.
I'd love to be able to have a conversation about how are we as leaders. I'm a Generation X, so you can imagine my leadership style.
Okay.
So how can we have a conversation with the leadership team of varying ages to really start to promote professional development among our leaders in our
Yeah. Great question. First thing is you got to sensitize them to this, right? The problem we all have is because we went through the experience, we went through our own upbringing experience, we think everybody's like us. You ever notice that? As human beings, we tend to think, everybody's, the whole world is similar to me. You have to make people aware of the fact that, no, there are very different people out there. And even if you use targeted selection, I don't care how good you think your targeted selection is. Remember what I said, you're fishing from a bass pond. You're likely to bring in some bass. So the first thing you need to do, in my view, is make people aware of the differences. Because if you think that I'm just going to call you in, you're an Xer, and I'm going to bring you in, I'm going to give you negative feedback, well, we're going to have a discussion about it. I bring in a millennial, and we're going to, you got a C on your paper. What do you mean I got a C? I'm not average. If I was average, I never would have gotten to Bradley. It's right. It's just a whole different approach, right? I have to adopt a whole different role and a whole different posture with them because it's likely they're coming from a different framework, a different set of perspectives. You've got to do an intense amount of, I think, training about these differences amongst the people. Remember, they're just differences. They're not good or bad. They're just different. And the critical thing is you got to be willing to vary your management style. I got way too many managers in organizations. See if this is anybody you know, right? Well, that's my management style. They're just going to have to adjust to it. Sound familiar? That's how I manage. They're just going to have to adjust to it. Good luck. Because your job is still getting things done through people, and the people are different. So you've got to be willing to flex and adjust your management style. You can't expect that these generations are going to be able to do that. They don't think the way you and I do. Didn't say it was good, didn't say it was bad. Said it's different. So again, there is no simple, easy process for this, as I said. Make them aware, continuous coaching and development, and recognizing that you're going to have times when you're going to do this, because we are different. Right? That's also, by the way, the beauty of the workplace, though, because that's what creates the diversity. Yes, sir?
What you were saying made a lot of sense. You think about, there is one person that came to my mind who deals with millennials a lot and seems to have a lot of success, and that's Joe Madden. One of his mottos is to his young players is, I trust you, it's my job to earn your trust. And that's what he preaches to all of his young guys coming up. You talk about trust, like that's exactly what it is. And he'll address issues at times, but he also does not require, he doesn't make them do batting practice every day, or he kind of lets them be them a little bit too. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Seeing, like, watching maybe baseball coach.
Sure.
Doing baseball manager. That's
Sure.
doing that.
Oh yeah, we've seen that. We have clearly seen, in athletics, football, basketball, baseball coaches have all had to adjust because they're generally dealing with that next generation because athletes tend to be younger. And the old grizzled veteran who could come in and okay, you guys are going to do wind sprints for the next 5 minutes. It's now not. See ya. I'm out. Right? I'm going to go back home and I'll do wind sprints on my EA Sports game. That's their idea of wind sprints. What else? If you have questions about it, we got a break coming up here. If you have questions, you want to talk a little more about it, I'll hang around for the break, and I'd be happy to entertain any thoughts or ideas you may have. Thank you for inviting me and letting me share these ideas and thoughts with you. I hope it sensitized you a little bit to some of the differences that you've got to deal with in the workplace. As I said, I always feel frustrated because it's like, oh man, I wish I could give you and here's how you fix it. But honestly, ladies and gentlemen, we are writing the rules every day. And we won't know what it looks like until probably 10 years from now. And by then I'll be retired. Because I'm one of the boomers, so I won't care. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.